But thank you all so much for joining us for Armchair Travel to Mexico City. Enjoy a visit of the capital of Mexico, North America's largest city. It's a captivating fusion of ancient history and modern energy. Ancient Mesoamerican ruins stand behind colonial architecture and cutting edge art. World class museums like the National Archaeological Museum and the Frida Kahlo Museum, dynamic neighborhoods, and legendary cuisine draw travelers from around the world. Also, take a couple of the city's most popular side trips, pyramids, the city of Puebla, a cultural mecca a couple of hours away. And this is all led by the traveling librarian Jeff Klapes, the retired head of reference services at the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield. He is an avid traveler and photographer. I again want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring. So, all 130 of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jeff for joining us today. And Jeff, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks everyone for joining me. Um, the traveling librarian right now is not traveling. He is stuck in his house, very tired from shoveling. So I think it's good that we're all at least able today to go and pretend that there isn't snow and go somewhere where it's actually quite pleasant right now. The funny thing is, this is a trip that I took just a month ago or so, and we had to come back early because of the previous snowstorm that we had here in Boston. Um, so for those of you who are in the New England East Coast area and who are suffering from the most recent round of blizzard and shoveling, I hope you enjoy today, where it will be pretty much sunny the whole presentation. So let's get started. Um, it's funny. I feel like Mexico City is a place I should have gone to years ago, and I don't know why it took me so long to get there, but I really had a wonderful time. Um, this again, as I said, this is a trip from just about 4 weeks ago, where I was there for 9 days, I think. We got cut short and had to come back because of the storm, so we came back one day early. But I think a week is a good amount of time to be there to see the highlights. And I hope I'll be able to show you all of that today. It is the capital and largest city capital of Mexico, and it's the largest city in North America, with about 22 million people in the surrounding area. And although you may think of Mexico as being very tropical and with palm trees and so forth, which it is, the capital is actually somewhat different because it's in the temperate highlands, very high up in the mountains, well over 7,000 feet. And you can see it on the map here. And we're going to go, let me just show you on the map. We're going to spend most of our time in the capital and the immediate surrounding area, but we're going to take two very nice day trips, which are very common if you have a chance to go. One is about an hour or so northeast of the city to the ancient pyramids, which are well worth seeing. And also we took a day trip about 2 hours to the southeast to a town called Puebla. Actually, not a town, it's a fairly good sized city. And on the way, you pass two of the biggest volcanoes, mountains in the entire country. Probably the most famous is Popocatépetl. Try saying that many times fast. That's this one here. And very close by is Iztaccíhuatl, which is a little bit about the same size. And way over here, we didn't actually get there, but the highest mountain in the whole country is called Pico de Orizaba, which is way over here closer to the coast. All three of those mountains, volcanoes, are roughly around 18,000 feet. So pretty high mountains. I do want to talk first, before we get into the actual tourism, I want to address a couple of things that I'm sure are going to come up in some of the questions and answers later on in the presentation. And so I'll run through those quickly. And if you have further questions, by all means, throw them into the Q&A and we can talk about them later. One thing that's very important that comes up anytime people think about Mexico, and particularly recently, is crime and safety. And I think it's important to mention that Mexico is an enormous country. And so, just like the United States, where if something bad was going on in Los Angeles, you would not avoid going to New York because they're 3,000 miles apart. Mexico is very similar. And here is the US State Department travel advisory map, which in Mexico is broken down by more specific areas because it can be significantly different in terms of safety from one state in Mexico to another. The yellow ones that you see, which actually cover quite a bit of the country, including the capital and the areas near it, is yellow, which according to the State Department is basically the same level of caution that they recommend for most of Western Europe right now. So it's no different than going to France or Spain or a lot of other places in Europe. Blue in the Yucatan and Campeche are even safer. It's a very safe place to travel. But you'll notice there are a number of areas that are orange and maroon, and those are the areas that, yes, they are dangerous, and you probably should not be traveling there. It is highly inadvisable, and you may have heard just in the past couple of days because of the killing of one of the leaders of a cartel over in, I believe it was Sinaloa or maybe down further in Guerrero, I forget exactly where. There's a number of areas where it is really inadvisable to go. But that should not alarm you and prevent you from going to the parts of Mexico that really are not terribly dangerous if you take the normal precautions that you would take in any other big city. A couple of other things that come up are drinking the water. I'm sure you've heard that water is not a good idea to drink in Mexico, and that is true. You will find in many hotels and restaurants, it's safe to drink the water in restaurants for the most part. And many hotels, it's probably fine for you to bathe and brush your teeth, but I wouldn't drink the water out of the taps. And many hotels will provide you with bottled water and even water stations where, to save plastic, you can take your bottled water and refill. The other thing that's a big thing to remember there is the altitude. Mexico City is very high, well over 7,000 feet in altitude, which is considerably higher than Denver in Colorado. So if you're going from sea level and arriving there, you may find that the first couple of days, it takes a little time to adjust to the altitude. And the best way to do that is just keep an eye on what your body is telling you and drink lots of water, go easy on the exercise, go easy on the alcohol and the heavy spicy food, just to give your body a little time to adjust. And the final one to mention is earthquakes. Mexico is in an earthquake zone, and although most of the earthquakes take place along the western coast where the fault line actually is located, Mexico City, and we'll talk about this a little bit in more detail later on, Mexico City is not that far, so it is not impossible for an earthquake to happen while you're there. And in fact, nothing happened while we were there, but there were two pretty good sized earthquakes that were felt in Mexico City only a couple of weeks before we went. So you'll see as you travel around the city that there's a lot of information in the hotels and on the street about what to do in the case of an earthquake, where you should go, what steps to take to protect yourself, where you should meet. There are all kinds of meeting points where if something happens, you should go. So before you travel there, it's not a bad idea to just read up on what are the standard protocols for what to do should there be an earthquake alert. But let's get into the actual things to see. And I want to talk a little bit about the history first. Mexico City history is very complex and goes back way into history, but it was founded for the most part in the 14th century by the Mexica people who gave their name to the country later on. And they were later known as the Aztecs. We'll talk much more about that later. The story about the founding of the city is that one of their gods told them to settle, because they were coming from elsewhere in Mesoamerica, to settle where an eagle was found devouring a snake sitting on top of a cactus. And here is a statue. You'll find this image throughout the city. And so they founded the city in that particular place, and it was called Tenochtitlan. And the whole valley at this time, this is pre-Columbian, pre-Spanish, the entire valley was a series of lakes. And Tenochtitlan was built on an island in the center of this vast valley full of shallow lakes. It was a highly advanced city. Probably estimates range at least 100,000 people lived there. Some estimates go even higher. It was full of temple complexes, markets. They had elaborate flood control and irrigation and canals, dikes, and causeways that connected to the mainland and managed the water. You can see an old painting that's in one of the archaeological museums. And just to give you an idea of how much has changed, this is the original landform back right before the Spanish would have arrived. And overlaid on it, all these little colored lines represent the modern metro, which is extremely extensive in modern Mexico City. So you can see just how much of the modern city is overlaid over what was a completely different geological environment back then. In fact, if you're into this sort of thing, I would highly recommend a website by a Dutch artist called Thomas Kolla, who's done a fantastic website. I'm going to give all of this information, a number of websites and links to Robert to share with you in the follow-up email that he sends after the presentation's over, with links to the various things that I'm going to mention. This is an amazing website because you can see it's one of those where he has created images of the modern city, and you can slide them back and forth over the ancient city to see how it has changed. That's just an example of how it works. And I would highly recommend that you visit that site just to see just how much a few hundred years makes a difference. So the city was pretty much the most important urban area in Mexico, I'm sorry, in Mesoamerica, all of Mesoamerica, until Hernando Cortez arrived about 2 centuries after the city really developed. And long story short, he teamed up with neighboring cultures who were enemies of the Mexica people, because there were many different city-states in this area, and they didn't all get along. So Cortez and those other people teamed up and ended up destroying the city, later rebuilding it as a Spanish colonial center and the capital of what they called New Spain. Over time, the lakes were filled in, and you can see the modern city overlaid over what is basically fill over an enormous area. We stayed in the appropriate named Hotel Catedral, which was literally right behind the cathedral in the center of the city, which was a very good location. They had an amazing breakfast buffet there. Really liked the hotel. This actually is a view from the hotel. They had way up on the top, they had a roof terrace with a lovely cafe and bar that looked out over the city, where you can see the Zocalo, which is the main square. A nice feature in this hotel is that the excavations in the basement of the hotel revealed parts of ancient temples under the foundations, which you can actually look at while you're sitting there eating breakfast. And here is a good model in one of the local museums showing you what the ceremonial center of the city looked like, showing the Templo Mayor. We're going to look at this more closely in just a minute. And the location of the cathedral and the hotel, which would have been kind of more over on this side. So I'm going to start in what's called the Centro Histórico, which all of this area is considered the historic center of the city, and the Zocalo, which is the name for the big square, open square right in front of the cathedral, is one of the largest squares in the entire world. And here is the cathedral lit up at night. It really is quite beautiful at night, surrounded by a number of important governmental buildings, the National Palace, and there's an enormous flagpole in the center, which you'll see in a little bit, beautifully lit up at night. This is the National Palace, and the same building in the daylight. and the enormous flag, which flies from a 160-foot flagpole right in the center of the Zocalo. While we happened to be there, there was an art exhibit of a number of uh, cactus sculptures, each of which had been designed by a different artist representing different concepts. So that was kind of fun to have right in the middle of the center in front of the cathedral. The magnificent cathedral replaced an earlier church on the site. And this one was started in about the 1570s, but took a couple of centuries to complete. So it has many different styles. The tabernacle and baptistry that you see on the right was built later than the main part of the cathedral. And the elaborate door and the carvings around it are a sort of hyper Baroque style that was called churrigueresque, which is named after an architect in Spain. But it's kind of Baroque on steroids, if you will, that has a lot of incredibly elaborate detail, both in the wood and the stone carvings as well. This is the main nave inside the cathedral and another of the doors to the tabernacle. The Baroque decoration around the organ and the choir, and another sort of wider view of the organ, which is one of the largest in the New World. And some more of the carvings. These are actually in the exterior of the building, right over the main entrance. And one of the wonderful things about Mexico City is all the layers of history. And literally right next door to the cathedral, because it was essentially built on top of it, is the main temple of the Mexica people in the original city of Tenochtitlan. And here's a model of that temple with a cutaway in the museum. And you can see at the top, this was an original Mexica temple that had two temples at the top, one decorated in blue and one in red. The blue one would have been dedicated to the rain god, and the red one to the war god. And what is left of this original temple is now a superb archaeological site and museum right smack in the center of the city. There are 7 layers to this temple because over time they built newer and larger versions of the temple on top of the old ones. And eventually later on, once the Spanish arrived, they disassembled much of this temple along with a number of other buildings from the earlier pre-Columbian civilizations and built the Spanish city. So the cathedral, in fact, is made from a significant amount of the stone from these earlier temples. It wasn't really until the 20th century that this location was found, and that they didn't know exactly where the temple was located until some buildings were renovated and they discovered underneath them the foundations of the Aztec Mexica structures. And in sort of the post-war period, the 1960s, 1970s, active excavation began to take place. And now the complex is fantastic. This is a view looking over the entire site to the west, back towards the cathedral. And so there's a lot of the parts of the temple that you can explore, and you can actually see the layers of the earlier temples that were later built on top of each other, along with some of the original sculptures. These are frog symbols and also the polychrome decoration, some of which still has its original color visible, because most of these temples at the time that they were at their high point, they were actually highly decorated, highly colored. This is me in a frivolous mood. This is called a chacmol, which was a common image that you would see not only in the Aztec culture, but also further south in the Mayan cultures if you've traveled there. And it was used for offerings in the temple. Another thing that you'll see is something called a tzompantli, which was a rack that was used to publicly display the skulls of war captives. And there would have been one near the main temple in the sacred precinct, very close to the Templo Mayor. And this is not an actual Tzompantli. This is a sculptural representation of one that was used elsewhere in the city. Um, the attached museum really blew me away. I was not expecting, I knew there was a small museum. I did not realize just how amazing it was. It's much bigger and much more impressive than you might expect. The disc in the center depicts a mythological story where the daughter of one of the Aztec Mexica um, goddesses it depicts the dismembering of the daughter of that goddess for story, a long story that I won't get into, but you can look it up. And a couple of other examples of the different kinds of things that you'll see in this museum. It's a fairly recent museum, so it's really beautifully put together. The centerpiece in the collection is this massive monolith of an earth goddess that was discovered as recently as 2006. And it still retains some of the original color, and it weighs 12 tons, which makes it the largest Aztec sculpture ever discovered. I need to point out, I mentioned earthquakes, and something that you'll probably notice in a number of these photos is many of the buildings are kind of off kilter. And that's because, as I mentioned, most of the city is built on unstable fill that was added over the centuries. And there are parts of the city that, because of this fill being unstable, and also partly because of earthquakes and partly because the continually growing city with an incredible population over 20 million needs a lot of water. And much of that water is taken out of the ground, out of the aquifers, which exacerbates the situation because the city is sinking. And in fact, there are parts of the city that are sinking as much as 10 to 20 centimeters per year. That's that's how bad it is. So it makes the city particularly vulnerable to earthquake damage. There were in the recent decades three pretty big earthquakes. The biggest one was in 1985, which some of you might remember, and that damaged huge numbers of buildings and killed at least 10,000 people, probably considerably more. They don't really know how many people died. There was another one in 2017 and yet another one in 2022. And in fact, only 2 weeks before we were there, I think it was either in late December, early January, there was a 6.5 earthquake that was felt in Mexico City, which fortunately did not cause any significant damage or injuries. But the good thing is that since the massive 1985 earthquake, Mexico City has enacted very strict building regulations. In fact, some of the strictest in the world. So that doesn't mean that it's immune to earthquake damage, but it is considerably better than it was decades ago. But you will see as you walk through the city a number of places where the streets, the buildings are rather tippy. In and around the historic center, this is the nearby Museum of the city's history of the capital, which has a very fancy Baroque facade, but you could almost miss this interesting cornerstone at the building, which is notably ancient and probably was taken from the Templo Mayor when the Spanish built these buildings. Right around the corner is also, you may not be able to afford to stay there, but you can go in the Grand Hotel, which was built in 1908, originally not as a hotel, but as a mercantile center for luxury goods that were coming in from around the world to Mexico. And in the 1960s, they turned it into a very fancy hotel. Now it is probably the poshest place in town, starting at around 400 US dollars per night. But even if you don't stay there, it's fine to walk in and at least look around the fantastic lobby with its incredible glass dome. It's not by Tiffany, but it's in that sort of Tiffany stained glass style, and amazing glass elevators and so forth. It's well worth peeking your head in. The city is crowded. And you need to just sort of get used to that. This is the main pedestrianized shopping street, which you can see is full of people. Um, I'm not sure how many of the 22 million people we saw while we were there, but it certainly seemed like quite a few of them. Um, and I think, again, in talking about safety in the city, unless you, as long as you take the sensible precautions that you would in any large city like Paris or Rome or Amsterdam or whatever, um, you're probably going to be fine. And the biggest issues are just being careful about your belongings, keep an eye on your wallet, because in crowds and on places like the subway, pickpocketing is an issue, but not really more so than any other big city. And to be honest, I felt totally safe walking around Mexico City. Granted, we weren't exploring dark alleyways late at night, but I think for the most part, as long as you take the normal precautions you would traveling anywhere, you should be perfectly fine and not worry. The metro is a great way to get around, although, as you can see, it can be extremely crowded. It's very extensive and incredibly cheap. It costs a ride on the metro costs approximately 25 US cents. I think in a week there, we spent not even $5 US on the metro the entire time we were there because it was so cheap. And it goes very far distances, and it doesn't have zones like a lot of other cities do. It doesn't matter whether you're going one stop or 10 miles. It's the same flat rate. And I show you this just because I don't know that you would need this while you're traveling there, but I found it kind of interesting. Part of the metro system, the public transit system, includes not only an enormous bus and train network, but some cable car lines that go over the hills into the far-flung residential suburbs. And they are part of the same system, so you can use the same Metro card to use those if you want to. Back exploring the central city, this is just another random church in that local style. And many of the buildings that you'll see, I mentioned volcanoes. Much of the area certainly in the area around Mexico City is volcanic. There are a couple of active volcanoes. A number of them are dormant, but Popocatépetl, which is only about 20, 30 miles away from the city, is still active. And in fact, it was smoking while we were there. So you'll see a lot of the buildings are actually made of volcanic stone. Some of it's blackish, some of it's reddish, but it's not uncommon to see that throughout the city. But the architecture, if you're into architecture, and if you've been to my programs, you know I am, it's a fantastic city to visit just because the entire place is strolling the streets and looking at these incredible buildings from different time periods. This is one of the most famous. It's called the Casa de los Azulejos, which means tiles, usually blue and white tiles. And it's an 18th century palace, a private palace for a wealthy family that is completely covered on the exterior with these gorgeous blue and white tiles, which were made in the nearby city of Puebla, which we're going to visit in a little bit. And it is now a sort of combination department store. And so it has a lot of shops, but also a restaurant with a very popular restaurant chain called Sanborn's, which is common throughout Mexico and certainly throughout Mexico City. They have pretty good food at reasonable prices, and like many old mansions of this time period, it has a beautiful courtyard, which in its day would have been open to the sky. Now it's covered, but it makes a beautiful restaurant. One of the other famous buildings very close by, just a block or so away, is the Palacio de Bellas Artes, which is a cultural and exhibition center that was built in the 1930s in a sort of interesting mix of styles. It's very Beaux-Arts style, but also inside, interestingly enough, it's very Art Deco. It's at the end of an enormous park in the center of the city called the Alameda. And it's across the street from the highest skyscraper in this part of the city, and also one of the earliest skyscrapers called the Torre Latinoamericana. It's one of the few tall buildings in this part of the city. There are some other farther flung areas that are full of skyscrapers, but not so much downtown. The roof that you can see here is colored ceramic and glass. And I can give you a pro tip. Um, there's a great view of it. If you go across the street, there's a Sears department store. And if you go to the top of the Sears, there is a very nice uh, outdoor cafe with a terrace, rooftop cafe, where you can have an expensive drink, but an amazing view of the building right across the street from up above. And I can give you an even better pro tip, which is that if you don't want to spend a lot of money for an overpriced coffee, and you also don't want to wait in line because it's very popular, you can go one floor down. And that's the furniture department where you can get exactly the same view for free, which is what we did because we didn't feel like waiting in line. But there's a beautiful view of the building from high up. If you go inside the building, you'll see it's very different from the outside. It's very Art Deco inside. It has murals by Diego Rivera and other famous 20th century artists. Nowadays, it hosts art shows, concerts, dance, and so forth. But it's free and open to the public. You can just go in. Um, you don't have to be attending a particular event there to be able to go in and see the interior of the building. Um, the tower, the skyscraper, the Torre Latinoamericana, was built in 1956 and for a long time was the tallest skyscraper in the city. And as I said, it's still really the only very tall thing right in the historic center. And you can go up to the top. Here's another building nearby, which is an old department store built in a very Art Nouveau style. But you can go to the top of the tower, which has great views over the city and the region, but it really depends on the weather. Unfortunately, particularly in January when we were there, because the weather is a little bit colder, it has that inversion problem that happens in a lot of cities where that's the time of year when the different layers of hot and cold air tend to push the pollution down closer to the level of the city. So it means that you're not as likely to see the mountains off in the distance, but it's still an amazing view over the city. If it is a clear day, you can see all the way to the volcanoes off in the distance. But even if the weather isn't that great, there are wonderful views over the center of the city. So you can see the Fine Arts Palace. You can see the pedestrian street that goes all the way back to the Zocalo, where there's a beautiful view of the Zocalo and the cathedral and all the major buildings surrounding that area. Excuse me, nearby is the incredible Palacio de Correos, which is the post office. And it's kind of surprising that the post office would be one of the top things to see in the city, but you really have to go. It was built in 1907 and suffered some damage in the big quake in 1985. But after that, they did a significant restoration, and now it's a museum, and it is one of the most amazing buildings in the city. A fantastic mix of styles on the interior, with this amazing stair hall. There are frescoes, and also because it's a museum of the history of the Postal Service in Mexico, there are some great exhibits on the history of how that developed in the country. But even if you skip all of that, the building alone is worth the price of admission because it's really just a spectacular place. It's hard to believe this isn't a palace or a royal palace or something. This is just the post office. Mexico City is also one of the big foodie capitals of the world. And yes, as you can see here on the left, insects are actually not uncommon in some restaurants, but you don't have to eat them. There's plenty of other options. Here's a typical sort of Aztec style soup. We ate in our a couple of nights just because we were tired. We ate in the hotel restaurant, which was actually quite good. And the drink that you can see here looks a little like sangria, and it's kind of like that. It's called clerico, and it's a Central American drink that is made of wine and fruit. There are different styles and recipes of it, but it was very refreshing and a lot like sangria. This is just ambling around and people watching in the Alameda, which is an enormous central park right in the middle of the city. Great place to people watch. There's also a number of interesting monuments there. This huge marble one commemorates the 19th century president Benito Juarez, and also a lot of more recent political protest signs as well. If you walk all the way to the other end of the Alameda, you get to the mammoth monument to the revolution. Mexico has actually had several revolutions. This one was finished in the 1930s, so that's why it looks kind of Art Deco-ish. It's a bit ungainly, but it is certainly impressive. And the street life in Mexico City is just incredible. It's sensory overload. And there's a lot of street food from street vendors. This was one of the local places selling delicious breakfast goodies. And on the left is a typical old-timey organ grinder, which is a longstanding tradition in Mexico City. Goes way back to the 19th century. Now it's kind of, I wouldn't say controversial, but to be perfectly honest, the music is pretty awful. They are very loud, and there's a little bit of interesting back and forth in the city, particularly from uh, stores or hotels that have where they hang out right in front because they're really loud and the music is kind of bad, but it is very traditional. So as a tourist, it is kind of fun to see that still going on. Um, One of the most important things that you can do while you're in Mexico City is explore the many neighborhoods. And so I'm going to take you to a couple of the most popular ones to visit because you can easily hop the metro. Another nice way to get around if you don't want to take the metro is to take an Uber or the local version of Uber, which is called Didi. Both are very good, very safe, very cheap ways to get around the city, particularly to areas where the metro isn't as convenient. So I'm going to take you to a couple of neighborhoods. Roma and Condesa, which are southwest of the center of the city, were for a long time very nice middle class residential neighborhoods full of foreign artists and writers. Now they've become a little bit more trendy and hip. Um, if you head to that area, you can get off the metro at another important monument to see, which is called the Angel of Independence, which is this huge column with the gold statue at the top. Um, and then from there, it's an easy walk to the Roma and Condesa neighborhoods, which are full of very elegant homes and gardens. It's also a good place to stay. It's not really in the center, but it's a very nice place to stay because of all the interesting hotels and chic restaurants and lots of shops. And it's a great place for walking and nightlife. So even though it's a little bit outside the center, it's not that, it's maybe a 20-minute metro ride to the center of the city. So um, it kind of depends on what you're interested in, what part of the city you might decide to stay in. But it has some wonderful residential areas and also streets with shops and restaurants and boutiques and so forth. It's also very shady and tree lined. I was surprised that such a major city, particularly high up in the mountains, has so much greenery. There were a lot of streets that were very shady, and you can admire all this beautiful architecture, many of which have been restored as apartments or hotels, galleries, and some are still privately owned, like this mansion here. As you work your way further into the center of this area towards the central park, which is called Parque Mexico, the neighborhoods get even fancier. And Calle Popocatépetl is one of the chic neighborhoods and streets to live on. There's some beautiful parks, again, very green and shady and pleasant. There's a lot of Art Deco in this area because that's a time period when the neighborhood was really getting developed. You may remember I want to say it was 3 or 4 years ago, I believe it was an Oscar-winning film called Roma, was filmed there and takes place there. The story takes place there, and if you haven't seen it, it's a very interesting take on what it's like to live in that part of Mexico City. So here's some more examples of the kinds of Art Deco that you'll see here. This is an apartment building, an old apartment building that's been turned into a hotel, a sculpture in the park, and another Art Deco apartment building. The tonier streets are boulevards that actually have these beautiful gardens running down the middle, almost like Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, which are great for strolling and dog walking. And these fancy benches. As you head back towards the more commercial and historic center, you'll see a lot of street art on some of the buildings like this or this. And back again near the Zocalo, this is back close to the cathedral and our hotel. This is a really good example on one of the side streets. You can see um, just how unsettled the city is by looking at the buildings all the way along the street. We wandered around the neighborhood just to the east of the Zocalo, which was crazy busy and had very few tourists in it. It was a lot of fun. There was just incredibly manic street life, people shouting. And here's another church with, oops, I just heard a loud noise, which I think is lots of snow falling off my roof. This is another example of a church that is in pretty serious need of fixing because it's tipping over. But the street life is just wonderful. And people are eating, people are shopping, people are selling stuff, so they're yelling at the top of their lungs. It's really fun to just walk around and see all of this. Here are some people selling churros. And there's some wonderful buildings in these neighborhoods as well. You can eat a lot of street food, although it's a good idea to be cautious with street food because if you're concerned about the getting sick, go easy on the street food and definitely head to the places where there are lots of locals eating because those are the places that probably have better reputations for being clean and having good, safe food to eat. This again is in one of the restaurants where we had some typical Mexican fare, including this is a tuna salad that was quite good. And if you're into alcohol, there's Mexico isn't really a big wine country, but as I'm sure you know, it's big into tequila and also mezcal, which is related. They're both made from the same kind of plant. Made from the agave, and you'll find interesting things like this where they put for flavoring, and also I think just to freak people out, they put scorpions and tarantulas and worms, which do actually give supposedly a little flavor to the mezcal. I discovered I liked mezcal. It is similar to tequila, but I found it had a more interesting flavor. And of course, they're very often used in mixed drinks as well. Here's just some street life at night. There are lots of street performers. Some are more authentic than others, but some of them are do typical traditional dance, which is kind of fun to watch on the street. Another neighborhood that you absolutely must go to is Chapultepec, which is absolutely enormous and has a number of important sites to see. Most of it is park, and it is huge, twice the size of Central Park in New York. This is one of the main entrances called the Lion Gate. The name Chapultepec is from the Nahuatl word, the language of the cultures prior to the Spanish arrival, meaning grasshopper. Chapultepec means the place of the grasshopper, and it's so named because there is a big hill in the middle of this park. And back then, when it was part of the Aztec Empire, it was a sacred hill that was considered to be shaped sort of like grasshopper. So that's where the name comes from. But there's a lot to see there. This is, as you enter the park, this is the monument to the boy heroes, which commemorates six very young teenage soldiers who were killed defending the city during the Battle of Chapultepec, which was one of the last major battles between the United States and Mexico during the Mexican-American War, and that battle was in 1847. But it's an enormous park. You can see this long view back down the Avenue of La Reforma, all the way back to that monument to independence that I showed you earlier. I was kind of surprised how, for such an enormous city, Mexico City was remarkably clean. And that was due largely, as far as I could see, to the literally thousands of human street sweepers that are all over the city, sweeping up trash, sweeping up leaves. Quite impressive. The park, as I said, is huge and has a couple of big lakes. There are running paths and cycling paths. You can go boating. Since it's the winter, its temperatures at that time are actually quite comfortable. It was in the low 70s most of the time we were there, which is a very comfortable temperature for walking around. And so you're neither too hot nor too cold. But it gets much greener, of course, at other times of year. And they do have a lovely botanical garden there as well, and also a zoo. But one of the major highlights is Chapultepec Castle, which was built from the 18th century, mid-19th century, and is now a museum. This shows you a model. It's on the top of the hill. This is one of the main stair halls in the inside. And it was the official residence of the Emperor Maximilian and his wife, Carlotta, who were there during the 1860s. And that's back when Napoleon III installed him, back when France had invaded Mexico at the time and created what was known as the Second Mexican Empire, which lasted for about 3 years in the 1860s. He was a Habsburg, Maximilian was a Habsburg who seemed to have not enough to do. So he was assigned to become the new emperor of the Second Mexican Empire. And his wife, who was actually Spanish, Carlotta, came and they lived in this royal palace. The U.S. was at that time very much occupied with its own problems with the Civil War in the United States. So they never actually recognized the empire. And although this was an empire being run by people who had basically no connection to Mexico, Maximilian was surprisingly progressive and reform-minded. But after the U.S. Civil War ended, things went south, pardon the pun, and the French withdrew, and Maximilian was executed in 1867, and that took care of that. But the palace is an interesting museum of the history of the time period and the history of the city. And it's a beautiful building in and of itself. So you can see some of the original staterooms, like the dining room, some of the bedrooms, and the staircases. I found it very interesting, not just in this building, but in many parts of the city. Translucent alabaster was used as a way of providing light into some of the more elegant buildings. This is one of the Rococo salons that they had, which has some amazing malachite decorations that you can see here, including an entire doorway, like a good 10 feet high. Uh, Again, this is the main hallway with its stained glass and murals. And on the roof, there are terraces that have spectacular views out over the city. The views alone are worth the price of admission because you can stroll around and look all the way down to the more modern skyscraper district of the city. And here on the right is a fountain in the form of a grasshopper, commemorating the origins of the name of the area. And you can also go to the very top of the castle, which has this stunning gallery with stained glass representing mythological views, and also the terrace gardens up at the top, which are very nice, surrounding what used to be an observatory. It was originally built for military reasons, and then for a number of years was an observatory. Now it's just a decorative pavilion that's part of the castle in the gardens. Um, you could be a street sweeper, but you could have what I consider an even worse job, which is cleaning all of the little crystals in the chandeliers. There is also a wonderful free botanical garden, mostly that has plants native to Central America. Um, this was just a funny photo that I got of a guy sleeping on the lawn. You may have heard of there's a sort of international outfit that does tourist recommendations and so forth called Time Out. So I thought it was funny that this graffiti was on the wall here in the botanical garden, and here's a guy taking a well-deserved break. The other major site to see in Chapultepec is the largest museum in the country and an absolute must-see. You absolutely should not go to Mexico City without spending at least a few hours in this place. It has incredible collections of Mexican history and culture. The building itself is also monumental. It was built in 1964 and has somewhere around 12 or so enormous exhibit sections covering different time periods and cultures of Mesoamerican history. And I won't go into detail on all the things I'll show you, but just to give you an idea of the scope of their collections, here's a sculpture of an acrobat, an armadillo. Each different section of the museum covers different cultures like the Maya, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Aztecs, and so forth. There are full-size reconstructions of some of the Aztec temples, showing the original color schemes that they would have had. There are reconstructions of important tombs from different parts of Mexico, and even full-size replica of ceremonial buildings with recreations of the frescoes that they would have had, to really give you a full idea of what just how incredibly advanced these pre-Columbian cultures were. It can be kind of overwhelming, so it's probably a good idea to research ahead of time what some of the most important exhibits they have, and focus on those, or focus on the particular cultures that you find most interesting, because you could easily spend several hours in the museum. This particular one is one of the highlights. This is a 27-ton Aztec sunstone, probably from the early 1500s, that was discovered under the Zocalo near the cathedral, 12 feet in diameter. A feathered headdress. This is a jaguar, or more likely an ocelot sculpture that has a bowl in the middle that was used for ceremonial offerings. And you may recognize this style as well. These are massive heads from the Olmec civilization, which was one of the earliest in Mesoamerica. But I can't emphasize enough how magnificent this museum is, which is not surprisingly, it is the most visited museum in all of Mexico, and one of the biggest. I think it is the biggest museum in the country. On the left is an elaborate obsidian ceremonial blade. Obsidian was big in this area. We'll see a little bit more of that when we go out to the pyramids, because there are a number of obsidian mines in the area around Mexico City that were significant in the economies of some of these earliest societies. Another chuck mold. Um, the other really nice neighborhood to spend at least half a day or more in is Coyoacan. The name comes from, again, the Nahuatl word, that early language meaning place of coyotes. And you will see symbolism of coyotes in the area around this neighborhood, like here in this fountain. It used to be quite far outside the city, and now it's just another one of those chic and relatively peaceful neighborhoods that has a lot of guest houses and parks and restaurants and shops and so forth. And some beautiful parks. It's another wonderful place to just spend the day wandering around, enjoying the many mansions that you can still see there, colorful buildings on the side streets, plenty of places to eat. In the central square of this neighborhood, this is a building that was built in the 1700s, that's now used kind of as the town hall for this particular district. And it faces the plaza and has a beautiful courtyard in the interior. It is said that Cortez lived in this place, but that's not actually possible because it wasn't built until a good 200 years after he died. But you'll still see things mentioning that. This is the courtyard in the interior, and another very pretty neighborhood church. The big church in the square is to St. John the Baptist. And it was a little interesting inside because it has an unusually wide nave. And some really delicious restaurants around this area, places to eat and shop. Here's a place that we stopped for lunch. I had some ceviche, which is one of my favorites. Here's some beef with mole sauce, fish. This is a mojito, but made with mezcal instead, giving it a slightly different flavor. And this is guacamole with grasshoppers. Those little teeny things are grasshoppers, and they're kind of they're worth a try. They're not actually all that weird. They taste a little bit spicy, and because of the way they're cooked, and they're just kind of like eating Rice Krispies. They're not as gross as you might think. This neighborhood also has one of the city's really fun markets. It's enormous, very busy, and has all kinds of stuff inside, whether it be fruits and vegetables, meat, fish, household goods, tourist stuff, crafts, you name it. We were fascinated by these. I don't know if they're meant to be giant birdhouses, but in Coyoacan, we saw several places that people had topiaried the trees into these fun birdhouse shapes. If you're walking around, be careful. Between the earthquakes and the settling and the enormous tree roots, you can find some areas like this where you have to be careful to look down as you're walking around. I wouldn't say this is one of the top destinations, but it's worth it if you have a little extra time, and it's not too far from the Coyoacan neighborhood, kind of on the outskirts. This is the campus of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And this is the main library. As a librarian, of course, I like to go visit libraries. It was built in 1956, and it's just one of the most impressive buildings in the city because it's completely covered with mosaics of the history and culture of Mexico on all four sides of this building. Um, and I should point out, speaking as we're talking about universities, it's worth mentioning that the Spanish, when they arrived, despite all the bad things that the Spanish did, they also founded the first university in the New World, uh, almost a full century before Harvard was founded here in Massachusetts. Um, Probably one of the other top five things that people do in Mexico City is to visit the Frida Kahlo Museum. And although my background is in art and architecture, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I knew remarkably little about Frida Kahlo. I knew only the most basic information about her life and her art. And the museum was well worth the visit. Um, it is so popular that you really should make a point to book tickets online ahead of time, um, particularly if you're going at popular the most visited times of year. But you can't just show up and hope to get in. You really do need to buy tickets ahead of time. And that's partly just because it's popular, but also because it's small. So it doesn't, they have to manage the crowd sizes because otherwise it would just be impossible to enjoy. It's known as the Blue House. This is where she lived. And it's called the Blue House for obvious reasons. In addition to the house, there's a very large and beautiful garden court with fountains and plants, and it has been a museum since 1958, only 4 years after Frida Kahlo died at the age of 47. And there are exhibits about her life, along with photos and paintings, as well as her family life and her childhood and her life with Diego Rivera. So there are some original artworks by her, including a lot of photographs. She was known for self-portraits. And you can learn a lot about her life. There's a lot of very personal family things like family photos and documents. What I didn't realize about her was just how much her health influenced her art and her life. She was afflicted with polio as a young child. And also in her teens, she was in a very serious tram accident in her teens. And so she spent a good part of her life going through, I think, 20, 25, 30 surgeries because of the severe injuries that she suffered from between the polio and the accident. So a significant amount of her art shows and is influenced by oops, there goes another huge pile of snow off my roof. Um, they also had a wonderful exhibit of her clothes, her jewelry, like this beautiful headdress. And they do have the very last painting that she painted before her death called Viva la Vida. And in addition to the exhibits about her life, the house still has numerous rooms that are shown more or less as they were during her life there, including her studio, which is upstairs with lots of natural light. So you can see where she painted. And here am I using the very mirror that she used for many of her own self-portraits. And this is, she actually had a couple of bedrooms, one for summer and one for winter. This one displays an interesting ceramic. I don't know how well you can see it in this photo, but this traditional ceramic urn, and that holds her ashes after she died. So even if you don't know a lot about Frida Kahlo, I would highly recommend it because it's very educational and really gives you an insight into her life and her art. But I want to take you to a couple of side trips before we end the program. This is Teotihuacan is undoubtedly the most popular side trip from the city. It's the ancient Aztec city, which is about 25 miles or so northeast of the center. You can go on your own, We took a tour. In retrospect, I think if I were to do it again, I would go on my own because it would give more flexibility to come and go as you please and spend as much time as you want. You can easily get there taking the metro and a local bus. If you don't want to do that, there are countless tours that you can take. Um, this is on the highways north of the city, showing you some of the um, sprawling neighborhoods that surround the center of the city. Teotihuacan is known as an Aztec city, but it isn't really. It actually dates from the very first centuries AD, and they don't actually know what it was originally called or who originally built it. It was probably the largest city in the area in the pre-Columbian era and was estimated to have probably up to 100,000 people. The ruins now, after Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, it is the second most visited site in Mexico, and justifiably so. The city eventually collapsed in around the 6th or 7th century and was mostly abandoned for a good period of time. And then in around the 13th century, it was taken over by the Aztecs, or as they were called, the Mexica. And they basically found a very nice place and decided, why not take it over and turn it into our own city? So much of what you will see there now is a mix of the original and the Aztecs. This is just a rough plan of the city. And it's kind of on its side. North is actually over to the left. But the yellow is what's called the Avenue of the Dead, the ceremonial pathway that leads right through the center of the city. And the three main temples to see are the Temple of the Sun, which is the largest, the Temple of the Moon, up at the other end, surrounded by its ceremonial plaza. And then further down to the south is a smaller temple, but a larger complex, which I'll show you as well. The entire city was about 30 square miles, and much of this other area that you see around it were residential and commercial areas that filled out all the extra space. This is a model of it. Way back at the Anthropology Museum, back in the center of the city, this is a model showing you kind of what the primary monuments in the city would have been like. If you go, be sure to take water, sunscreen, and a hat, because even in winter, it can be very hot, and it's very large and has almost no shade. So be prepared for that. This is the Avenue of the Dead, looking way back towards the Pyramid of the Moon and the hillside right behind it. And the Pyramid of the Sun, which was built, both of them were built around the 2nd or 3rd century AD. This pyramid to the sun is the 3rd largest pyramid in the world. It's about 230 meters on a side and 65 meters tall. You can barely see some human beings. At this point, you are not allowed to climb to the top. So the only people on it were workers, but you can get an idea of just how big it is from there. And this is looking at it towards the west. Because we don't know very much about the original builders, it's not really known which gods or god this was built in honor of, but it does face west with astronomical alignments. So it is reasonable to assume that there was probably some connection to the sun because it faces directly west. The style of architecture here is very typical of this area. This is one of the smaller buildings, and it's worth noting that all of what you're seeing here would have originally been covered with carvings and very brightly painted, predominantly in red, but also in other multicolors as well. This is the temple of that I mentioned that's way to the south. It's called the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, and it's unusual and unique among the ruins now because it still does have a number of its original detailed sculptures. And these are the ones, if you remember just a little bit ago back in the Archaeological Museum, there are some recreations of this exact temple showing the original colors that they would have used before they disappeared over time. They found about 200 sacrificial burials under this temple, and it's surrounded by an enormous courtyard. This is looking back towards the north, towards the Pyramid of the Moon in the distance, and the Pyramid of the Sun closer in the foreground. You are allowed to climb at least partway up the Temple of the Moon, Pyramid of the Moon, which gives a great view over this enormous plaza. You can see the people climbing up to this platform halfway up. And if you do that, it is tough on the knees, but it's worth it for the view. You can see down to the central altar. But depending on how strong your knees are and whether you're afraid of heights, it may or may not be for you, because it is very steep, more so than your average staircase. But it does reward you with this incredible view, vista all the way down the Avenue of the Dead, with the Sun Pyramid fitting very nicely and deliberately with this mountain behind. It is thought that these temples were located to align with the hills and mountains around them. In addition to the main pyramids, there's a number of other places to see. This is probably one of the most impressive residential complexes that shows carvings and some of the original color, as well as this one. This is a very impressive fresco depicting a puma. If you go on a tour, they will probably stop in a number of other places, including places where you can buy tourist stuff, and maybe stop for lunch and see some more or less authentic Aztec ceremonial dances. And frequently, if you take a tour, but also if you went on your own, you could easily combine this because it's in the same part of town if you take the metro. This is the most visited Catholic pilgrimage site in the world, if you don't count the Vatican itself. It is in the Basilica de Santa Maria de Guadalupe, which is in honor of some apparitions of the Virgin Mary that took place in the early 1500s. And it's an interesting place to visit, even if you are neither Catholic nor particularly interested in the Virgin. It's an amazing complex to see because of the two main churches that are there. The one on the right is a basilica from the 18th century, and the one on the left, much larger and obviously very modern, was built in the 1970s. The modern church is supposed to invoke the tent that would have housed the Ark of the Covenant as it was taken on its journey through the desert thousands of years ago. And you can see the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe from the apparitions in the 1500s, which now hold pride of place in this enormous modern church building. It really is incredibly impressive. To ease crowding, if you go through, you can look up at the image using a moving sidewalk that actually passes below it. So you get a very nice view without having to fight your way through the crowds. But the entire complex is worth a visit. This old basilica is in this typical Spanish colonial Baroque style. And behind it, you can also see the convent of the Capuchin convent built around the same time. One thing that's kind of unfortunate about the church is, like I said, in many parts of Mexico City and nearby, it's suffering from serious subsidence. So it's sinking slowly towards the front. There have been a number of interventions to at least stabilize it, which is happening to a number of monuments around Mexico City. It has a typically lavish and impressive interior. including some beautiful mosaics. And it has this enormous plaza to accommodate all the pilgrims. And the weird looking building on the right is a modern carillon. And on the hill behind it is the original chapel, the original parish church called the Capilla de Cerrito, which is the original parish where the apparitions supposedly took place. The church that's there now is actually a couple centuries later from the 1700s. But it's worth it if you have the time to climb up the hill. On the way up, you'll pass this lovely Capilla de Pocito from the 18th century that has this beautiful blue, white, and yellow decorative tiled dome. This was built over a natural spring. And there are some lovely gardens that have been rebuilt in this kind of traditional Aztec style. And the view back towards the center of the city, which you can see way off in the distance, um, to the south, there's a nice view over the entire complex and the skyline way off in the distance. So you can see all the different time periods dedicated to the Virgin. Um, and to finish, I'm going to take you to Puebla, which is another easy day trip that you can take to the southeast of the city. These two mountains that you can see off in the distance, which we were lucky the weather was a little bit clearer on these days. So these are the two big volcanoes. Iztaccíhuatl, which is this one on the left, is a dormant volcano, and Popocatépetl, which is the one a little further off in the distance, is they're both around 18,000 feet high, and Popocatépetl is still active, and you can see some smoke coming out of it. If you head to Puebla, it's about a two-hour drive. Either we went on a tour. You can also take the bus if you prefer, and you go from Mexico City, head through the mountains, so you go pretty close to the volcano. So if the weather is clear, you get really nice views. And we're going to stop on the way in a place called Cholula, which is just on the outskirts of Puebla, that you can see down here. As I said, we did this in a day. It's a popular day trip, but I think if you have the time, and if I were to go back, I would probably want to spend more time. It would make a good overnight also, just a day or an additional day or two, because Puebla has so much to see. We'll stop first in Cholula, which is a medium-sized city, which is kind of merged into the greater agglomeration around Puebla. But in the pre-Columbian period, it was one of the largest religious center in all of Mesoamerica. It had probably around 50,000 people. It's a very nice place to visit now. It was known in the classical period for its pottery, as was Puebla. Many of the tiles that you see in Mexico City and on its buildings come from this area. And you can also buy interesting street food, like this combination of fresh berries and grasshoppers, if you're into that sort of thing. The main reason to stop in Cholula is to see the pyramid, the ancient pyramid, and the more recent church that was built on top of it. You would never guess, but Cholula's pyramid is the largest in the world by volume. It is 1,400 feet on a side and 216 feet high. You can't really see it the way you can the pyramids in Egypt or the pyramids in Teotihuacan, where we just were. But in terms of volume, it is the largest pyramid ever constructed on Earth. In the 1570s, after Cortez arrived, the Spanish built this church on the top. And what that interestingly makes it is the oldest continuously used structure in all of the Americas, because it was used as a pyramid and is still used today. This is the Santuario de la Virgen de los Remedios, which is a beautiful church completely encrusted in gold, and with these beautiful, elegant domes and lavish decoration inside. This actually is a little chapel behind the altar, which is a little jewel box completely covered with gold. And also, um, one of the nice things about the pyramids is that it's worth the visit just to see the views over the area. There are about 40 churches in Cholula, and you can see many of them, including this very big one right at the base of the hill, which is a Franciscan convent. But you can also see the spires of many of the churches in the area and the vibrant colors all over town. And not far away is another church that's worth visiting called the Templo de Santa Maria Tonantzintla, which was built in the 18th century in a very unusual style, which is unique to this area. It's a sort of combination of Spanish Baroque, but with a lot of very indigenous design elements that you can kind of see here in these sculptures of more Mexican imagery and iconography. And the church itself, you can see the facade on the left, is very unusual. These are some photographs of the inside. Just totally different from anything that you would see in traditional standard Baroque architecture. It's named for an Aztec goddess, Tonantzin, and she was kind of reappropriated as an iteration of the Virgin Mary to kind of combine and strengthen the connections between the earlier indigenous beliefs with Catholicism that was brought in by the Spanish. And finally, we're going to end in Puebla, which is, depending on how you measure, it's either the fourth or the fifth largest city in Mexico, but it's very concentrated. Most of the historic stuff is really concentrated in the historic center. So it's actually quite compact and walkable and has beautiful architecture and a long history of, as I mentioned, pottery and ceramic tiles. And also more recently, it's food. It's a big food city, and also candy, which we're going to see in a minute. It has a grid plan like most of the Spanish colonial cities. So it's got a central plaza, a lot of colorful buildings, and it's a well-touristed city. So there are plenty of streets full of shops and restaurants, boutique hotels, places selling crafts and so forth. I found that even more so, perhaps because it's a little bit more compact, but even more so than Mexico City itself, Puebla has lots of buildings that are just covered with tile work. And in addition to that, you can see on these buildings some elaborate plaster work, which is unique to Puebla, done in plaster and stucco. This is called the Casa de Alfeñique from 1790, which is it's a style that is named after the local sugar candy that's been made in Puebla for a long time. And you can see that all of this stucco it almost looks like frosting, and that's quite deliberate as a local style. And here's some more images of the city with buildings from different time periods, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, like this one here, and others with tiles and sugar candy all over the outside. You can buy lots of pottery in Puebla, both antique and modern. And as I mentioned, it's also very popular for candy. It has a long tradition of candy making. And there is even a whole touristy street called Calle de los Dulces, which has about a concentration of about 40 different candy makers all together in one local area on this nice pedestrianized street where you can buy all kinds of different local goodies. Or if you prefer, you can go to Hasta la Pizza, baby. This is a building that I wasn't sure of at first. It turns out it's a local municipal theater, but I loved the sort of just plain, simple sculptural white and yellow. And not far from that is a church that's a little on the outskirts of the center, but also well worth the visit. This is the Franciscan convent, which on the inside is kind of austere and simple, but the facade is just incredible, with completely covered with all these colored tiles. And as you stroll around the city, you'll see, again, multicolored buildings on all of the streets. It's a great place to stroll. Many of the streets, like in the neighborhoods in the capital, many of them have huge trees that provide shade during the hottest times of year. And this is the main plaza, like most colonial Spanish style cities. There's a big plaza in the central with the cathedral. Usually the cathedral and the main government buildings are nearby. That's the cathedral in the background. There was a really nice um, uh, shopping gallery that connected two of the streets in between, and the major municipal building that you can see on the right. And the cathedral, which boasts the tallest towers of any church in Mexico. And the inside is really a standout interior. It started in the 15th century and was really the earliest church in Mexico, several years ahead of the cathedral in Mexico City, to really have such an elaborate interior. The dome is 43 meters high, and the whole interior is just filled with these sumptuous sculptures and chapels, um, and neoclassical ceilings. It's quite a building. This is a broader view of the interior. And the other church that you should absolutely visit in Puebla is Santo Domingo, which has this is actually a chapel on the side called the Chapel of the Rosary, which was built in the 17th century. And the adjacent building, again, completely covered in frosting. The Church of St. Dominic, Santo Domingo, is typically lovely with a impressive Baroque altarpiece. But the highlight here, which really steals the show, is off to the side, is the astonishing Rosary Chapel. The paintings that you can't really quite see from the reflection in this shot are paintings showing different stories from the life of Christ, but it is completely encrusted with gold, top to bottom. The baldachin in the center has Our Lady of the Rosary. You can see her here on the first level. Up a little higher is St. Dominic, and then the Archangel Gabriel way at the top. This is actually made of marble, but completely covered in the original gold leaf from when the chapel was originally built. The detail is simply mind-boggling. And again, I should emphasize that the gold that you are seeing here is original to the building. It has never been regilded. And you can see even here, there are some slightly unusual indigenous styled elements that are kind of hidden in with the Baroque colonial gold. If you are into all of this, we didn't have time, but Puebla is also known for a more recent museum, very unusual modern architecture, that's a museum of the Baroque, not just in Mexico, but the history of the Baroque as a style throughout the world. Unfortunately, it's a little further on the outskirts of Puebla, so it's if you're only visiting the center, it's not too convenient. So we didn't get a chance to go there. But I think if you were to go back and spend a couple of days in Puebla, it's considered a very worthwhile museum to visit if you're interested in this kind of architectural history. There's another popular area called the Alley of the Frogs, which is known for its outdoor markets, craft markets. The best time to visit Puebla is on the weekend because that's when most of that is happening. But even on a weekday, you'll find plenty to see on any day. Here's some afternoon sun hitting hitting the frosting. And I have to finish with a library because as a librarian, I like to visit libraries wherever I go, but this one is even more unusual. Um, this imposing building that you can see here is now used as a cultural center. But the main reason to visit it is that it has the oldest public library in the Americas. It is the Biblioteca Palafoxiana, which you can see here. And it is named after a former bishop of Puebla. He founded it in 1646 with about 5,000 of his own books. And he is quoted as saying, he who succeeds without books is in an inconsolable darkness, on a mountain without company, on a path without a crozier, in a darkness without a guide. So he was into libraries. And although calling this a public library is very different from what we would consider a public library today, it's still, for its time period, bear in mind we're talking about the 17th century, it was a pretty big advance. It was completed in 1773, and over the years, additional volumes were added. So now there's about 45,000. And they date from the very earliest book from the 1490s up to books from the 20th century. And they have some wonderful exhibits of books that are actually open, representing different important volumes that you can look at. And I loved how they had these elegant little signs denoting the different sections of the library, such as Ascetica and Mystica. The building is just exquisite. You can't check books out like a modern public library, but even today, it is open to researchers. Anyone can go in and research in the library. So it has been functioning for 450 years, roughly. Am I doing the math right? As a public library. And on the way back from Puebla, we treated, because the weather was reasonably good. This is Popocatépetl, and you can again see it does smoke pretty frequently. It is not unusual for it to be erupting. And it was a lovely view on the way back at sunset, back towards the capital, where we had a final evening in the Zocalo and a nice dinner. So I will end there, and let's take a look. I see quite a few questions. Let me stop my share. And let's take a look at the questions. Oh yeah, quite a few. I could not see Cancun on the map. How safe is it to go to Cancun? Cancun's kind of interesting. I have not been and have no desire to go. It's very touristy, and as such, although the Yucatan and Campeche states are actually very, very safe, they're pretty much the safest parts to travel in Mexico. Cancun is kind of by itself, not because it's a hotbed of violent crime, but because it's so touristed. It's a beach destination with lots of tourists, so it attracts the kind of crime that tourists are most vulnerable to. So if I were to give you a recommendation, unless you really want to just sit on the beach, I think you'd get a more authentic Mexico experience by going to other parts of the Yucatan that are actually far less prone to that kind of pickpocketing and muggings and stuff like that. There's Cancun is basically, it does have some Mayan ruins near it, but I would highly recommend going to places like Campeche or Merida or the central Yucatan instead of going to Cancun. Having said that, it is not a no-go destination, and as you know, millions of people go there every year. I did show pictures of my food. Let's see. Please explain your pronunciation. Okay, yes. We today refer to Mexico with a KS sound. Um, the Spanish pronunciation Mexico, um, and which is what is the current pronunciation from the locals. The Aztec pronunciation is a little different. Mexica is the pronunciation that's used for the original culture from which the modern country of Mexico gets its name. So there's the three different pronunciations depending on whether you're not Mexican or whether you are Mexican or whether you are referring to the pre-Columbian civilization that was in the area where Mexico City um, uh, is today, and the country gets its name from that culture just because it was at the time, and at the time the Spanish arrived, it was by far the most important urban center in Mesoamerica at that time. Um, I didn't talk about air pollution. Um, Mexico City has a lot of air pollution, but I was pleasantly surprised to be less affected by it than I thought I would be, particularly since the winter months, it's supposed to be worse. I would say the haze, like the vistas off into the distance, were definitely hazy. But walking the streets and just generally, breathing, I'm prone to sinus problems if there is a lot of that kind of stuff, and I had no trouble. And I was pleasantly surprised compared to places like cities in India and cities in China where I don't think I would do well. Um, Mexico City has an air pollution problem. There's no question about it, but I didn't notice it as much as I thought I would. More just visibly, but not in terms of breathing and sneezing and that sort of thing. Um, we took, oh, sorry, missed one. What was my favorite street food? We didn't eat too much street food, to be honest with you. We ate in a lot of good restaurants. I think baked goods are what I would have gone for the most because you're less likely to have any digestive problems because they're cooked. But there were some really there's just an amazing variety of sweet and savory breads and cookies and churros and all kinds of stuff like that. Um, Transportation from Boston. There are many ways to get to Mexico City. We took a direct flight from Boston uh, to Benito Juarez, which is the main airport, international airport, and it it was 6 hours there, 4 hours back, and Delta flies there. We flew Aero Mexico, which is partnered with Delta, but pretty inexpensive. I think our flight was under $500 round trip and direct, which is certainly nice. And also for jet lag, Mexico City is only 1 hour different from the East Coast here. So that makes it much easier if on being tired when you get there, you don't experience the jet lag. The best season, Mexico City being not tropical is pretty good all year round because um, because it's so high in altitude, it isn't steamy hot the way the Yucatan would be, for example. It does get hotter at certain times than others, and it can be wetter at certain times than others. But winter is actually a very nice time to be there because it's not as touristed in January, and the temperature is perfect for being outdoors because it's not too hot, it's not too cold, and it's great temperature for eating outdoors. Um, but Mexico City is a good place to go almost any time of year. English is spoken, particularly in museums and restaurants and hotels and things like that, but not as widely as you might expect. So I think it is well worth it to learn at least some basic Spanish. Um, but we didn't have my Spanish is very limited. I can understand a lot of Spanish, and read a lot of Spanish, but my spoken Spanish is terrible, other than a few basic phrases. And really, we still didn't have a lot of trouble. That was somebody mentioned is that the childhood home of Frida Kahlo? No. Um, it is a place where she lived as an adult with Diego Rivera when they were together, but it is not the house that she was born in. No. Um, we didn't go to any theater in Mexico City. There's a lot there. Um, Mexico City has, I think I read somewhere that it has more museums than any other city on earth. And that could be anything from the huge archaeological museum to the one that was a couple of doors down from our hotel, which is the history of chocolate. There's, but there's an incredible art scene in Mexico City. So if you're into music, art, dance, um, uh, galleries. It's amazing, and something I should probably mention. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I think it's worth pointing out. I said it was huge. It is huge. Think of it like New York. You would never go to New York City for a week and think that you're going to see everything. It's just not possible. There is too much to see, and Mexico City struck me as a very similar kind of place. Um, there is no way in a single visit that you will see all the stuff that the city has to offer. So think about what you enjoy doing. Are you into shopping? Are you into food? Are you into history and architecture? Are you into archaeology? Um, what's the stuff that you enjoy the most? And then focus on the things that you can find the time to do. Um, somebody mentioned the building that has the murals with the unusual top. That's called the Palacio de Bellas Artes, the Palace of Fine Arts, and it's basically just it's a big arts facility, art center. Another place that you can see, there is a museum to Rivera murals that we did not get to. And also the other big place to see Diego Rivera murals is in the National Palace right opposite the cathedral in the Zocalo. Um, and unfortunately, we didn't get there because we waited too late in the week. And you do need to, you can't just walk in. You have to get a timed ticket, and you have to go on. Depending on your language skills, they have Spanish language tours, they have English language tours. So if we had known, we would have planned to go earlier. And by the time we were at the end of our trip, there were no convenient times for us to visit. But there's a lot of places in the city where you can see um, his murals. The Palace of Fine Arts is one place. Um, People always ask, how do I manage to get so many photos without people in them? It's hard to do that in Mexico City because there are people pretty much everywhere. But I'm patient at waiting. If there's something I want with no people, I wait. um, thanks, Barry. I'm just trying to see the questions. Oh yeah, somebody mentioned that there's a subway entrance that is a gift from France in the Art Nouveau style. And yes, it's right next to the Palace of Fine Arts. If you go around the side, there is a metro entrance there that is basically a copy of the ones that you would see in Paris. Someone also mentioned some of the subway cars are reserved for women only. Yes, that is also true. Um, not just the cars, but on the platforms, there are places where women and children under a certain age, younger kids, um, can travel in cars that are specifically for women only. Um, who built the pyramids? It depends on which pyramid. So the Mayan pyramids, which are nowhere near Mexico City, they're all in the south of the country, were built by the Mayans. But the pyramids that you saw in today's presentation um, were built either by the Aztec culture, the Mexica culture. Aztec is a name that was given to that culture much later, but the Aztecs did not actually call themselves Aztecs. But the original pyramids, like the ones that we saw at Teotihuacan, we don't actually know who built them. We know when they were built, but we do not actually know which culture built them and what they called themselves. And oh, yes, they were definitely a communal effort. Um, somebody's um, somebody mentions a place in Yucatan. I did not visit Celestun in the Yucatan, but I did visit a place called, oh, now I'm forgetting the name. Begins with an I. Anyway, the yellow color, I don't know if this is true elsewhere, but I do remember one of the places, Izamal, I think was the name of the town, which also had a Mayan pyramid smack in the center of it. The Pope visited Izamal back in the 1990s, I want to say, late 80s, early 90s. And because yellow and white are official colors of the Vatican, the entire town painted itself in honor of the Pope's visit, painted itself yellow and white. And that same color yellow is common in a lot of the places I've seen in Mexico, but I don't know if it's for the same reason. But certainly in the past, if you go back to when many of the pre-Columbian civilizations painted their structures, blue, yellow, and red in particular were the colors that were most notably used on those structures. So that I don't really know the answer, but that would be interesting to look into in more detail. Um, how much money? Mexico City is pretty inexpensive, or it can be. It's one of those places where you can spend tons of money if you feel like it, but you don't have to. There's a wide range of hotel prices. Transportation is very cheap. Ubers and the metro to get around the city are incredibly cheap. Food can be cheap depending on what restaurants you go to, or you can spend a ton of money. None of the places we went were very expensive at all. Um, uh, Somebody's mentioning books and websites. I actually, to save time, I put together a list that I'm going to send to Robert so that when he sends you a follow-up email tomorrow, like he usually does, I've provided a bunch of links to a number of websites that I found very interesting for the history um, of the place, and also a really interesting book that we just read about the history of Mexico City, basically from just before the Spanish arrived until today. So I'll make sure he includes all of those links in what he sends to you. What would you bring back as a souvenir? I'm not much into souvenirs, but if I were, I think the pottery was the stuff that I liked the most. Um, do I have another travel video presentation planned? I think yes. Robert is probably also going to mention that. We're doing at the end of March, I think the last weekend in March, he'll give you the details. We're going to do a trip to Norway. So I think that's that. There's some also questions in the chat. Oh, quite a few. Um, da, 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 um, air quality, we already talked about. I'm just trying to see if there's anything that hasn't been covered yet. couple of people are commenting on the general issue of safety and so forth. Um, yeah, actually, it's funny. Somebody, before we went there, we saw a couple of recommendations that the historic center around the cathedral was actually not a good place to stay, because during the day it's fine, but at night um, it wasn't so much. Although, to be honest, I didn't feel that. But in general, we were never out on the streets when there weren't huge numbers of people out. Um, and yes, I think in general, and this applies in the United States, in any big city, you need to be careful in places where there are crowds, um, to keep track of your belongings, and you need to be careful of places where there are no crowds, particularly late at night, because those are the riskiest areas. But I think the thing that struck me about Mexico City, particularly given the general reputation Mexico has, um, and of course, again, emphasizing that it really significantly depends on where you are in Mexico, just like it does in the United States. I was very pleasantly surprised at how safe I felt in Mexico City. Um, we were not walking around parks late at night or streets with nobody on them, but I I think if you are nervous about traveling there because of the things you've heard, I wouldn't be. I would feel no different there than if you were going to LA or Amsterdam or New York or Rome or any place like that. Having said that, as you know from things that have happened just in the past couple of days, there are parts of Mexico that can have significant problems at a moment's notice. So, and that's true all over the world. So be careful, be aware, do your research um, before you travel anywhere, and be a sensible traveler. Don't just walk into any place without knowing. Um,
So, Jeff,
yeah.
first of all, I lost Wi-Fi for about 5 minutes, so you may have become the host. You might have seen that little
Oh,
message pop up.
I
Um,
didn't, but okay.
yeah, and I did want to note because I fell off right as Lori was asking her question about when your next presentation with us is, and that is going to be on Tuesday, March 24th, so 4 weeks from today, and we will be traveling to Norway. So that is what's coming up. And as Jeff said, that will be in the follow up email. So, Jeff, as we
Um,
approach the 2 hour mark, let me
oh
ask
goodness.
Lori's question. Did you see Lori's question? I think it might be the last one. Do
I'm
you,
trying to see if I missed anyone. Um,
Lori just asked a question about 60 seconds ago. Do you travel with the group? You referred to we often. Do you take groups on tour?
um, no. Don't take this personally, but no, I am never taking people on a tour. I did that once with some friends, and I'll never do it again. Um, and that was just six of us. Um, I tend to travel either by myself, with my husband, or maybe with a friend or two. Um, I rarely travel on organized tours unless it's like a day trip where it's just easier. Like in this particular one, we went to Puebla on a tour just because it was easier than taking a 2 hour bus ride and having enough time to do what we wanted to do. And sometimes I also like to have a guide who is local and you can ask them questions and so forth. Um, we took a tour to the pyramids, which in retrospect I think was a mistake because we didn't have enough time. And if I were to do it again, I would have just gone on my own and taken the bus. So it really depends on, for me, it depends on the destination. But in general, I prefer independent travel. But that's something that I think is very personal about the way you like to travel and who you're traveling with, and also where you're going. Um, I have I have plans to go various places in the world, and some of them I don't think I'd go on my own. I would go on a small group tour or something just because I think it would be less stress. Um, uh, I do also, the only other place I've been in Mexico that I have a program on is the Yucatan, and I will give Robert the link to that as well because there's a recording of that online. Um, I saw a couple of other quick questions I did want to answer because they were quick. Can you pay in US dollars? No. Mexico uses the peso, which right now is about, I wanted to say, was it 15 to the US dollar, give or take? One thing I would mention about money, credit cards are widely used all over Mexico City, but it's good to have some cash. The confusing thing about the peso is that they use the dollar sign. So you will see prices in pesos, but they use the dollar sign. So it can be we were confused initially when we were taking money out of an ATM because it wanted to know, like, do you want to take 200 or 300 or 400? But we weren't sure, is that 200 pesos or 200 US dollars? And so that's something to get used to. Da, 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 da. Oh, and the other thing I just wanted to mention quickly, because I saw someone commented on it, in the historic library that we went to, somebody wanted to know if there was a printing press. That was not a printing press. And it's only the second one I've seen in the world. The other one I saw in Italy. Um, I don't know if you remember in one of my photos, there was a thing that looked like it was a big wheel, and each part of the wheel had like a little flat thing on it. Um, it was not a printing press. It was a way for someone to have multiple books open at once, each one on its own little shelf, and you could turn the wheel around to look at different books all at more or less at the same time and go quickly back and forth from one book to the other. It's an incredibly clever thing from centuries past, and it reminds me a little bit of what my laptop looks like right now with multiple um, browser tabs open at the same time it's kind of the 18th century version of that. Anyway, since we've gone over and I'm sure I missed questions, Robert will send you a follow-up email with a lot of the links of some resources that I think you might find interesting, including some of the websites. And also, as always, he will include my email. So if I missed your question or didn't answer it sufficiently, do feel free to email me privately, and I will be happy to talk to you that way. And with that, I guess I'll hope to see you in another 4 weeks or so for Norway.
So, folks, let's give Jeff a big virtual round of applause for another great presentation. As he said, look for an email for me probably tomorrow morning, with a link to the YouTube recording, as well as information about some other upcoming virtual programs, including the one in 4 weeks. I will include Jeff's email along with anything else he wants to send over to me. And please take the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom in a moment. So thank you all so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks. Happy shoveling and see you next time.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.